I'm an alpha, so is my partner. Sounds pretty unconventional, I know. You rarely see two alpha male types get together. On top of that, we've been together for almost 10 years. Pretty impressive, right? I was the one who pursued him. We met at the Imperial Academy. He was the eldest son and heir of an Imperial Duke, top of his class in academics and athletics, with a bloodline-rated SSS class. Total Ice King. I was a C-class alpha from a low-ranking family that had to pull a lot of strings and spend a fortune just to get me in. The only reason I knew who he was is because the first thing I learned at the academy wasn't in any textbook. It was how to hit on the shy, sheltered omegas of high society. But no matter how much any of them seemed to like me at first, it always ended the same way. Right before we made it official, they'd apologize and tell me they'd fallen for Adrien. After striking out again and again, I finally decided I had to see this legendary Adrien for myself. And when I did, he took my breath away. The boy had black hair and wore a simple white shirt, but his features looked like they were painted with the finest brush. He had this cool, refined presence. The second our eyes met, a wave of heat washed over me. Even though he was an alpha just like me in that instant, it felt like I just inhaled the most powerful aphrodisiac in the world. After that, everyone else was just a passing cloud. There was only him. I confessed my feelings. Adrien just walked right past me without a word. I sent him gifts. Adrien gave me a cool glance and, once again, walked on by. I started writing him love letters. This time, I learned my lesson and didn't sign my name. But my chicken scratch handwriting probably stood out in a top-tier school like the Imperial Academy. Paired with my previous attempts, pretty much everyone knew that some C-class alpha from a minor family was chasing Adrien. The academy really lived up to its reputation as a gathering place for the elite. Even the way they ostracized me was unique. There was no outright bullying or anything. Instead, everyone at the school, including the teachers, just started treating me like I was invisible. Looking back, it was a horrible feeling, but I was shameless back then. Even after all that, I kept following Adrien around. It's almost funny, but Adrien became the only person who didn't ignore me. Maybe it was just because he didn't care. He treated everyone with the same indifference. The first time he ever spoke to me, he said, "I don't like alphas." I did a lot for him. I'm not saying that to make myself feel better, but to show him how much I cared. Because in the end, that's how I won him over. At least that's what I think. I found a hospital to install a prosthetic omega gland for me. Removing an alpha's gland is often fatal, but adding a second one is much safer. The worst that could happen was organ rejection. That's what the people at the institute told me anyway. It was an innovative new experiment. With the omega population dwindling, prosthetic glands were seen as the way of the future. I had arranged it with them in advance, got the procedure for a low price, and didn't even tell my family. I used alpha suppressants so Adrien could only smell the scent from my prosthetic omega gland. I couldn't smell it myself, but Adrien later told me it was like wine, an intoxicating scent that made his heart race. I felt a little guilty. I had stolen his jacket, the one soaked in his alpha pheromones, and took it with me for the procedure. I wanted my new scent to be a perfect match for his. Adrien dated other people, all of them omegas, the soft, beautiful type, but I didn't mind. I knew from the beginning that winning him over would be a marathon, not a sprint. Maybe it was something that would never happen in my lifetime. But then, the year we graduated from the academy, my chance came. At the graduation dance, an omega from a small family drugged Adrien. It was a cheap move, even lower than my relentless pursuit. I was still an alpha, after all. The moment I saw the look on Adrien's face, I knew something was wrong and immediately swooped in to play the hero. The little omega tried to fight me off, but I shamelessly used my alpha scent to overpower him. He scurried away with his tail between his legs. I helped Adrien upstairs. I had no intention of taking advantage of him, so I just got him a room to rest in and went to the bathroom to get him a cold towel. Like I said, my prosthetic omega gland was custom made to match Adrien's scent. When Adrien grabbed my hand, I didn't realize what was happening at first. It wasn't until I saw his crimson eyes that I knew something was off. By then, he had already overpowered me, not that I put up much of a fight. I let him move inside me with reckless abandon. I'd never seen him so intense before, even if it was just because of the drug. It hurt like hell. An alpha isn't an omega, we don't naturally lubricate down there. Adrien had completely lost control and was in no state to prep me. He bit down hard on my prosthetic gland and even knotted inside me, marking me completely. I thought I was going to die. The pain was unbearable, even worse than when I had the surgery. And besides that, I knew Adrien wouldn't be happy when he woke up. Adrien and I got together. When he woke up that day, he was furious. He looked down at me, still half dead in bed, and sneered. "This was your plan all along, wasn't it?" I couldn't even move a finger. My body was alternating between fever and chills, and my mind was working in slow motion. All I could think was, wow, Adrien can be this cruel. But he was a man of his word. Imperial law dictates that once a full bond is formed, you have to take responsibility for the person you marked. The law was meant to protect omegas and betas, but because of it, Adrien broke up with his boyfriend at the time and started seeing me. My prosthetic gland was especially dependent on his scent, and it became even more sensitive after being fully marked. I was almost as fragile as a normal omega who had just been bonded, and he was an SSS class alpha. He told me he'd asked his family to have the Institute research a procedure to remove the bond, and while they were at it, they might as well remove the prosthetic gland I'd gotten. He said that, until then, he would take responsibility for me. We never got married. He told me he would never marry me. My family thought I was a total embarrassment and eventually disowned me, so I naturally moved in with Adrien. It was a house he bought for himself, not his official family home. But I guess I was satisfied, and so we've been together for 10 years. For the first few years, Adrien seemed pretty interested in an alpha's body. He came around a lot. Then he stopped coming as often. I learned a lot over the years. Besides housework, I also studied business. I even worked for his family's company for several years under a fake identity from home. In this high-tech era in the empire, my manufactured resume and credentials looked completely real. I just used a different name. I got hired easily, and several of my major proposals were even selected. But it was still painful. Now, if I'm away from my alpha for too long, I get depressed. Over time, I've even started to feel suicidal. Let's not get into it. It's just the standard post-bonding syndrome. Talking too much about it just makes me sound pathetic. Anyway, I'm alone now. The last time Adrien came over was 2 months ago. He told me the Institute had made a breakthrough. They could remove the bond soon, and they could take out my prosthetic gland at the same time. He told me he still preferred the scent of a pure omega. Then, ignoring my look of despair, he added one more thing. Even though your scent is like wine, it's the cheapest wine there is. After he left, I started thinking about how to die again. The depression was agonizing. The after effects of the surgery, the clash between two extreme pheromones, made it hard to breathe. Sometimes I felt like I was about to pass out, but no one knew. I was just so tired. Loving Adrien was never tiring. Being dragged along like this was the real torture. It was a slow-acting poison, seeping into every part of me. I deserved it, I know. But do I regret it? I turned on the gas. Oh, I have a gas stove because Adrien likes old-fashioned, home-cooked meals. I got all this equipment from a flea market. I learned to cook those meals to please him, too. But you see, it was all useless. He still wouldn't come. Sigh. In a daze, my hand moved on its own and I called Adrien. He didn't pick up the first time. I called again. He answered. He probably didn't expect me to be so shameless. But it was also part of his personality. He could never be completely ruthless. Otherwise, we never would have lasted 10 years. What is it? Adrien's voice was cold. For a moment, I didn't know what to say. I just listened to his voice, lost in thought. I still love him so much. I'm insane. Adrien was getting impatient. If there's nothing, I'm hanging up. After a pause, he added, "Someone from the Institute will contact you in a couple of days. Just wait at home." My voice felt light and airy. "Will you come? It's been so long since I've seen you." Adrien didn't want to answer. I'm hanging up. I rushed to get the words out before he did. "I don't regret it." He didn't even give me a second to breathe before hanging up. His reaction was what I expected. I wasn't surprised at all. I wasn't even sad anymore. You get used to it. I really don't regret it. I wanted to tell him that killing myself is my own choice. I just can't endure it any longer. Whatever. It's been so many years. Still so in love. There's no cure for me. Adrien doesn't love me anyway. But maybe, after he gets married someday, he'll tell the story to his wife and friends about an alpha who loved him so much he pretended to be an omega for 10 years and even died for him. And with his dying breath, he told him he had no regrets. We didn't even have a contract, let alone a marriage. It does sound like a pretty good after-dinner story. He'll be free after I'm gone. He likes omegas, anyway. And for me, out of sight, out of mind. My heart, heavy with depression for years, suddenly felt light. I let out a long breath as my consciousness began to fade. One person's death can set two people free. It makes dying feel like some grand ceremonial event. It almost makes me sound important. But there's no one to save me. I closed my eyes. Adrien was in a meeting when the call from the Institute came. In addition to his title as an imperial duke, the Vance family conglomerate also controlled several key economic lifelines of the empire. In this high-tech age, company meetings were held via holographic avatars. Once formally hired, employees of the empire would upload and register their likeness, allowing them to attend meetings from the comfort of their own homes, sipping freshly brewed coffee. Jason isn't here today? Adrien noticed someone was missing. His brow furrowed slightly as he asked the cool question. The others looked around and, seeing that the person was indeed absent, swallowed nervously. Jason was an omega who had been with the company for several years. He always wore a mask, but when he occasionally smiled, his crescent-shaped eyes were particularly gentle, which made him very likable. But in meetings, he was level-headed and clear-thinking, and his proposals were often highly regarded. Even their notoriously picky boss seemed to have a soft spot for him. Almost everyone in the company secretly speculated that once Adrien finally separated from his long entangled partner, this mysterious omega would be next in line. Adrien's expression did change, but the boss rarely let his emotions show, so no one dared to guess what he was thinking. They just felt he was in a bad mood today, probably because Jason was absent. Halfway through the meeting, the virtual phone of Adrien's beta secretary lit up. She glanced at it, and whatever she saw made her face turn pale. Under the immense pressure, she couldn't help but speak up cautiously. "Mr. Vance, the Institute is trying to reach you about an urgent matter." It might have been their imagination, but everyone present felt Adrien's expression soften slightly. "Put it on hold. I'll call them back later," Adrien said calmly. The beta secretary paused. They said, "It's an emergency, it's about your—" Adrien cut her off, annoyed. "I'm in a meeting. We'll talk later." He had a good idea who it was about and why the Institute was calling. He figured that person had finally cracked. After all, that person wanted to be with him so desperately. After the meeting, Adrien turned off the virtual display, and the holographic avatars of the employees vanished one by one. He rubbed his temples, feeling a bit tired. Jason hadn't been at the meeting today, and honestly, it felt strange. Over the years, he had grown accustomed to the Omega's focused, sincere gaze during meetings. That person's eyes were always fixed on him, and even someone as cool as Adrien could feel the gentle, restrained affection within them. He was a cold person by nature, dedicating all his passion to his work. With his exceptional intelligence from a young age, he had always appreciated colleagues who were meticulous and pursued perfection. Jason was one of them. This professional trust and admiration gradually made him pay more attention to Jason. The era of high technology and virtualization had catalyzed the Omega rights movement. Today, pheromones no longer dictated a person's work environment at most. They influenced face-to-face interactions and the genetics of the next generation. His company was particularly diverse, with an almost equal distribution of alphas, betas, and omegas. He had even been featured in the Imperial News for it, named one of the bosses most committed to human equality and diversity. He couldn't care less about such titles, he only cared about his subordinates' efficiency and attitude. Besides, he thought coldly, There was another reason for that title, wasn't there? The fact that he had an alpha partner. Ever since that person had cut ties with his family, his name seemed to have been forgotten. The only title people gave him was that person who relentlessly clung to Adrien. After all, that person wasn't even a complete alpha. Adrien would occasionally think back to their first meeting at the Imperial Academy, to the vibrant alpha with the sunny smile, and compare him to the person he was now, cautious and timid in every move after getting the prosthetic omega gland. The thought of that person's cowering figure, with a smile that always seemed forced, made him want to avoid going back to that home. That person's natural alpha scent was a rich, mellow red wine, like the deep sea. It was the only scent among millions that had ever made him pause to take a deep breath. But ever since that person deliberately had an omega gland installed, that original scent had vanished, replaced by the cheap smell unique to the prosthetic. After they bonded, he had single-mindedly pushed the institute to research a gland removal surgery. The feeling of being manipulated was particularly displeasing to him. The bond-breaking surgery wasn't strictly necessary, but the prosthetic gland had to go. He didn't want to come home to a partner who was neither human nor ghost, neither alpha nor omega. Speaking of which, his beta secretary had mentioned a call from the institute today. He probably doesn't want the gland removed and is pulling some trick, he thought faintly. In a few more days, he could consider going back. By then, that person would likely have his original scent back, a thought that made him feel a rare inclination to return home. He opened his phone. The institute had called him twice during the meeting. Fearing they would anger him, they hadn't tried again and had contacted his secretary instead. His secretary had probably relayed his response. As for that person, he hadn't made a single call, as if he were sulking. He tapped his fingers lightly on the transparent electronic desk, pondering whether to call the institute back to check on the progress when a friend called. His friend was also an alpha. They had met at the Imperial Academy, both from similar backgrounds. Now they ran their own businesses and would occasionally go out for a drink and a casual chat. It was mostly his friend who did the talking, while he just chimed in here and there. He answered the phone, and before he could speak, his friend burst out. "Adrien, dinner tonight?" This time, his friend chose a particularly high-end, members-only club in the Empire. Every week, they featured a famous singer, not a recording, but a live performance with audience interaction. But since the patrons were all aristocrats, they weren't fanatical about the singers. It was more about enjoying the nostalgic, interactive atmosphere. Adrien was close with this friend and knew he was a bit of a playboy. Choosing this place on this day probably meant he had his eyes on tonight's singer. Sure enough, his friend was impeccably dressed. Adrien inwardly scoffed at the sanctimonious bastard, but kept his face impassive as his friend pulled him into a corner. "Why the long face?" his friend asked, seeing right through him and clapping him on the shoulder in mock anger. "This one's different. You might even know him." Adrien smoothed out the wrinkles on his sleeve. "Not interested. I just want a drink. He used to have a crush on you. He's an omega." His friend gave him a sly grin. "Whether you're interested in him or not, I just want to see how different he is now that he's a big star. If he's cute, I might try my luck." Adrien thought, as if he hadn't recognized the singer on the poster he'd passed on the way here. His friend was just making excuses. The two ordered drinks and sat at the marble bar. A few other wealthy-looking people were sitting nearby, chatting quietly and sipping their drinks. Before long, the singer took the stage. At his friend's urging, Adrien finally glanced up. The singer wore detailed eye makeup, but his features were still unfamiliar. The equality movement required all genders to wear suppressants in public, so Adrien felt nothing, completely unmoved. "I thought you were only interested in omegas. How come you still haven't found someone you really like?" his friend asked, giving him a disappointed nudge when he saw his lukewarm reaction. Speaking of an omega he liked, an image of a pair of gentle, affectionate eyes staring at him during a company meeting flashed through Adrien's mind. He didn't let it show, simply lowering his head to take a sip of his drink. His friend sighed in resignation. "Ha, don't tell me you're really going to spend the rest of your life with that person." A flicker of emotion finally crossed Adrien's face. Just as he was about to show his annoyance, His friend wisely shut up. Fine, I won't talk about that person. Don't want to ruin your mood? Come on, let's drink. Adrien downed his glass. The singer on stage had just finished a song. In the brief moment of silence, Adrien said quietly to his friend, I'm going to the restroom. As he was leaving the restroom after washing his hands, he noticed someone standing by the door, seemingly waiting for him. It was tonight's singer. Adrien raised an eyebrow. Can I help you? The young singer blushed. I didn't expect to see you here. Right, his friend had said he also went to the Imperial Academy. Sorry, I don't remember you, he said bluntly, intending to end the conversation and head back to the bar. He'd had too many conversations like this. Please wait, the singer said anxiously, gently tugging on his sleeve. He quickly retracted his hand with a flinch when Adrien paused and turned back with an annoyed look. I have something to tell you. He led the young singer to a quiet, secluded spot and tilted his chin. Spit it out. The young singer's face turned red, whether from shyness or nervousness, and he stammered, unable to get a word out. Adrien was losing his patience again. As if sensing it, the singer finally spoke softly. Adrien Sr., I'm sorry. Seeing that Adrien seemed to be waiting, he bit his lip and continued. I know you don't remember me. I had a huge crush on you in high school, so much that it feels embarrassing and excessive now. Adrien raised an eyebrow. Really? The only suitor from high school he still remembered was that person. You probably don't remember, but I feel like what I did was awful, a real crisis of conscience. It's a shame I never got to see you in person again until today. Now that I have the chance, I wanted to ask for your forgiveness, maybe. The young singer was already rambling. Adrien hated it when people couldn't speak clearly and was about to leave, but the singer added one more thing. At your graduation dance, I drugged you. I knew you liked omegas, but I didn't expect that person to get to you first. It's because of him that you've been stuck with him all this time. Adrien was completely floored by this bombshell and stood frozen in place. Almost everyone knew Adrien only liked soft, beautiful omegas, and the singer was no exception. He genuinely believed that if that person hadn't interfered, he and Adrien would be together, happy and at peace. He truly felt he had ruined the life of the person he loved. If he could go back, he would have bravely resisted that person's alpha pheromones and insisted on staying with Adrien. After all, it had been 10 years, and Adrien was still with that person out of a sense of duty. He could have done the same. He'd heard recently that their relationship had grown distant, so he figured that now, young, handsome, and famous in the music world, was the time to let Adrien know that his partner should have been an omega all along. Or, at the very least, confessing would make Adrien remember him. But he never expected Adrien to actually let out a cold laugh that sent a chill down his spine. So it was you, he said in a low voice. When the young singer was thrown out of the club, he was still in a daze, clueless as to what had just happened. Moments later, his agent informed him that the company was unilaterally terminating his contract, even willing to pay the penalty. At the same time, social media exploded with scandals from his past, from childhood up to the present. There was even evidence of his family using his omega status to seduce an aristocratic alpha for resources during their lowest point, a stain that the empire, especially its omega population advocating for equal rights, could not tolerate. His family, unable to withstand the negative press, disowned him, posting their decision on social media like a public guarantee. His head was spinning. Everything was supposed to go his way. Why was Adrien so furious? Hadn't everyone said that Adrien had wanted to leave that person for a long time? Shouldn't he have been happy to learn that there was someone else he should have been responsible for? Adrien, his face ashen, dealt with the situation before returning to the bar. What did you do? His friend asked, astonished. In just half an hour, the club owner had come out to apologize, saying the singer was involved in a major scandal and had been asked to leave. He offered to comp everyone's drinks as an apology. Adrien was silent for a moment. He sat down, slowly took a sip of his drink, and then, for the first time, showed a look of bewilderment. Do you remember what that person's name was? His friend had no idea what kind of riddle Adrien was playing at, but he sensed the strange atmosphere and thought hard. He came up with nothing. That person was just that person. Who else could he be? I really can't remember his name, his friend said, then gave up and laughed it off. But he cut ties with his family anyway, so what's in a name? I remember you were going to get the bond and gland removed. You two won't have anything to do with each other after that. Ha, only that person would be crazy enough to drug you like that in the first place. That was right. Adrien turned his head slightly to look at his friend's nonchalant expression. It wasn't just his friend, it was almost everyone around him, his subordinates, his family, that person's family, and even the entire empire. They all had the same attitude toward that person. Indifference, contempt, and a complete lack of concern. And he had only just realized that the very thing that had first made him resent and despise that person, the thing that had colored everyone else's opinion of him, was a lie. His name is Nick, Adrien said softly. The name felt foreign as it rolled off his tongue. They had been together for so many years, yet even he had rarely called that person by his name. When that person called, he would answer with an impatient grunt. Whenever he went back to that house, it was almost always to satisfy his physical needs. After all, under current imperial law, once bonded, you could only be with your partner, otherwise it was illegal. Even so, that person's name remained insignificant. He usually didn't even need to say a word, he'd just walk in, pull the person who had just lit up with joy into his arms, and drag him to bed. After a satisfying session, he would usually sleep soundly, preparing for work or a day off. But often, he would be woken the next morning by the aroma of breakfast that person was cooking, a scent that felt like home. He didn't dislike it. That person tried everything to please him, like searching for old-world recipes and ingredients, spending several times longer than the Empire's AIs to cook food to his liking. He had seen it all but had coldly assumed the man was just trying to make up for drugging him and forcing this bond. Though the food was satisfying, he never offered a single word of praise. He would usually just eat and leave for work, never giving him a shred of hope. And now, knowing that the entire foundation of their relationship was a mistake, Adrien felt a sense of panic he'd never known before. Had that person ever tried to explain? His memory was exceptional. He quickly recalled the scene. The day after the graduation dance, he woke up filled with a sense of betrayal and anger that completely consumed him. He had coldly berated that person, who just lay in bed, looking numb. After listening to his accusations, that person had only said softly, "It wasn't," and he had sneered back, refusing to even look at him. If it wasn't you, then who was it? His friend stared at him, surprised. "Adrien, what's wrong with you?" he asked hesitantly. Adrien snapped back to reality, realizing just how strange he must seem tonight. "I think I've made a mistake somewhere," he murmured, a dazed look in his eyes. Seeing him like this, his friend grew even more confused. Just as he was about to speak, Adrien abruptly stood up. "I have to go." He suddenly wanted to go back to the place where that person was. It felt like it had been a long time since he was last there. If it was all a mistake from the very beginning, then that person, Nick, should never have been treated that way by him. Not for 10 long years. As Adrien walked out of the club, he recalled his friend's expression, as if he'd seen a ghost, and let out a quiet breath. He really wasn't acting like himself since learning the truth. Here he was, desperate to go home, forgetting that the person, Nick, should be at the institute undergoing surgery right now. He wondered how the gland removal surgery was going. The procedure had been mature for years. A prosthetic gland was a bit different, but it wouldn't be any harder to remove than a real one. The only reason he'd made the institute research it for so long was to wait for the technology to mature even further, to ensure it was completely foolproof. Though he had always been strict and cold, he had to admit that he had been far more lenient with Nick than with anyone else. Otherwise, he would have forced the bond and gland removal right after they bonded, regardless of Nick's life or imperial law. Adrien thought back to the call from the institute during the meeting that morning and his beta secretary's warning. He couldn't help but pull out his phone and dial them. No one answered. Of course, it was already close to midnight. The Empire's labor laws meant that work lines were automatically shut off by AI after hours. He never bothered to save the personal numbers of any institute staff, not even his own beta secretaries. He hesitated for a moment, then decided to head back to that house first. Tomorrow morning, He'd tell the institute to put the bond-breaking surgery on hold. He might need to have a serious talk with Nick about their relationship. But if it was already done, that was fine too. The bond-breaking surgery was more mature now thanks to the institute's research. It would give them both a chance to start over, which wasn't a bad thing. When Adrien arrived back at that house, he felt a strange premonition even as he stood at the door. It was like his heart was slowly sinking, being submerged in ice-cold water. That feeling made him slow his movements as he opened the door. Click. The lights turned on automatically, courtesy of the AI. The house was sparsely furnished, making it feel empty and highlighting the owner's loneliness. The first thing that hit him wasn't the warm, familiar incense that person usually burned, but the strong, pungent smell of disinfectant. It was as if someone had just done a deep clean in the last couple of days. Adrien instinctively thought it was that person. He was always so tidy, but something felt off. His instincts were usually sharp, and this feeling urged him forward. Until he reached the door of Nick's room. He had never been this cautious in this house before because that person was always there. In fact, he had barely looked at the house before that person moved in. So this was the first time he was setting foot here while Nick was away. He had certainly never been in Nick's room. They always used the other, larger bedroom, the one connected to the study. That way, he could wake up the next day and go straight to work. He was always single-minded when he worked and hated being disturbed. Even if Nick was still resting in bed, he would impatiently tell him to get up. Gradually, Nick had quietly moved his things to the other room and would slip out of bed before Adrien even had a chance to frown, going to prepare breakfast. He had noticed, but only saw it as Nick being sensible and nothing more. Nick's room was small but felt lived in. He had somehow found cartoon-patterned bedsheets, and the entire room was decorated in warm tones, a stark contrast to the black, white, and gray neutrals Adrien preferred for the rest of the house. On Nick's desk was a computer, its light still faintly glowing. It seemed the owner had only turned off the screen, not the machine itself. Driven by a curiosity he couldn't explain, he stepped closer, but his attention was quickly drawn to something else on the desk. A wooden picture frame. It looked like something from the old world. In fact, much of the furniture in Nick's room seemed to have been sourced from antique markets, which probably explained its uniquely homey feel. There were two people in the frame. Him and Nick. They had never taken a photo together. This picture seemed to have been carefully cut out from a larger group photo and pieced together. The him in the photo looked young but still unsmiling. His eyes drifted past himself, noticing that the suit he was wearing was the same one he'd worn to the graduation dance 10 years ago. And that person, Nick, looked so different from how he was now. Though he already had the prosthetic omega gland back then, his eyes were still bright and full of life, radiating an alpha's confidence and strength. Now he was thinner, smiled less, and even when he did, it seemed forced, which had always annoyed Adrien. Looking at the photo, Adrien remembered how that person had burst into his life in high school like a whirlwind, completely ignoring what others thought. He was such a misfit among the self-disciplined aristocratic students of the Imperial Academy. Yet he was also the most memorable, impossible to forget. Unconsciously, a hint of nostalgia crept into his eyes as he gently placed the frame back down. He wasn't sure what prompted him, but he turned on the screen of Nick's computer. A whim? He just suddenly wanted to know what that person did with his time. Nick's desktop was tidy, with only 2 or 3 unnamed folders. He randomly clicked on one and found it was full of confidential documents that only internal staff of the Vance Corporation should have. Adrien quickly scanned them. It felt strange, but he also felt certain that person would never harm him. But that person didn't work at his company. Why would he have these files? He was absolutely sure there was no one named Nick among his subordinates. He clicked on a document marked with a red dot. The content was familiar. It was the Vance Corporation's latest marketing proposal for an architectural project. But he distinctly remembered the author was. Sure enough, the document was signed by Jason. His memory wasn't failing him. Nick knew Jason? He didn't have a strong impression of what Jason looked like. The man always wore a mask. He admired his talent and had sensed from his devoted gaze that he probably had special feelings for him. He had even found himself paying more attention to him. If Jason was absent, he felt something was missing. He had vaguely thought that Jason was his ideal partner. But at this moment, a doubt began to form. Nick, how could he know Jason? He clicked through all the red dotted files, proposals, and reference documents. Almost all of them were projects Jason had completed or was currently working on. An unbelievable premonition quietly rose within him. Adrien's face darkened, but the hand holding the mouse trembled uncontrollably until he clicked on the other folder. This folder was a direct interface to the Vance Corporation's database server. When he opened it, Jason's virtual avatar popped up on the screen, asking for a login password. The number of shocks Adrien had received today had already broken his record for the past several years. He stared blankly at the virtual avatar, at the gentle, smiling face behind the mask. It was only at this close distance that he realized how similar those eyes were to Nick's. In the new high-tech era, people could slightly adjust their features and body shape when uploading their avatars, as long as the original person was still recognizable. Nick had clearly made Jason shorter, which in turn made his face look smaller, making his naturally handsome, narrow eyes appear larger and rounder. Jason was Nick. Jason was actually Nick? He stood there, stunned, and reached out a hand to touch the virtual image. But the digitized projection shattered at his touch, only to reform a moment later. Without its user, the avatar simply stared blankly ahead. In an instant, memories of Jason flooded his mind. Jason had joined the company later on. He wasn't sure of the details, as that was HR's domain. But Jason's work and communication skills were top-notch. He was also very low-key and never tried to take credit, which earned him the goodwill of his colleagues. His goal seemed to be simply to earn a seat at the meeting table with him, and he had succeeded. And he had often noticed Jason's persistent, gentle gaze on him during the weekly meetings. Out of curiosity, he had once looked up Jason's file. It was sparse, listing only his education and internship experience. His gender was listed as Omega, but because the meetings were virtual, he could never smell Jason's pheromones. He had once wondered what a person like that would smell like. But because he had a partner, all such thoughts had stopped there. Adrien reached out and turned off the screen. His mind was still reeling from the shock, and a feeling he wasn't familiar with began to creep in. It felt like sadness. It was as if something he had always despised was actually the treasure he had secretly admired and desired all along, and the original reason for his contempt was completely baseless. Why that person? Nick, why would you do all this? He tiredly pressed a hand to his forehead and lay down on Nick's bed. The bed smelled familiar, a faint hint of the cheap gland scent, and beneath it, the deep, intoxicating red wine aroma of the sea. Nick, he whispered the name, his voice trembling uncontrollably for the first time in his life. Tomorrow he had to contact the institute. Ring. When Adrien was jolted awake by his work phone, he didn't immediately realize where he was. He was almost always woken by his internal body clock. This was the first time his own phone had woken him. Was it the comfort of his surroundings? He had a terrible temper when woken up. Frowning, he rolled out of bed, answered the phone, and said curtly, "Who is this?" "Hello, is this Mr. Adrien Vance? This is the Imperial Institute of Science." The person on the other end was taken aback by Adrien's irritated tone and paused before speaking politely. Adrien froze. The memories of last night flooded back, making him feel anxious, agitated, and uneasy. That person is about Mr. Nick. For some reason, the researcher's voice became strained. As if to be considerate of Adrien's feelings, they paused again. "Go on," Adrien said, holding his breath. "I tried calling you yesterday, but later I contacted your secretary. It seems there was a miscommunication, and she gave me instructions for standard procedure, but I still felt you should know. Even though I'm aware you and Mr. Nick were not married and your relationship wasn't good, under Imperial law, a partner has the right to know our final arrangements." The more Adrien listened, the more confused he became. A bad feeling rose in his chest. What arrangements? What didn't he know? What happened to Nick? The institute, seemingly afraid he would hang up, rushed to say the next sentence before he could respond. As imperial law does not permit burials, Mr. Nick's body has been cremated. We're not sure how to handle the ashes, as they are usually collected by the partner, so we were hoping you could come to the institute. Adrien's mind went blank. The voice on the other end of the line seemed to be speaking a foreign, incomprehensible language. He heard every word clearly, but he couldn't understand what they meant when put together. The person from the institute sensed his silence, unsure if Adrien would come or not. When Adrien hadn't answered their calls, they had tried contacting Nick's old family, but they had hung up as soon as Nick's name was mentioned. That made Adrien their last hope to avoid sending the ashes to a public cemetery, a final courtesy they wanted to extend to Mr. Nick himself. Though they didn't know Nick personally, they couldn't help but feel a sense of sorrow for his fate. Adrien managed a weak laugh. Nick is just having surgery to remove his gland and the bond, right? He must have misheard. Ashes, it was too absurd. How is his surgery going? I was just about to contact you last night. If the bond-breaking surgery hasn't been done yet, you can put it on hold. Just removing the gland is fine. He adopted a light, casual tone, one that would have made his subordinates' jaws drop if they'd heard it. This time, it was the Institute's turn to be silent. Mr. Vance, the staff member said, sounding troubled, are you not aware that Mr. Nick has passed away? The smile froze on Adrien's face. His grip on the phone loosened. When we arrived at the address you gave us yesterday, where Mr. Nick was living, we found he had already passed away. We tried to contact you then, but you didn't answer. We later contacted your secretary, who said you didn't want to hear about Mr. Nick. She said there was nothing she could do and gave us instructions for standard procedure. The Institute cannot hold on to remains without reason. Mr. Vance, before we processed Mr. Nick's remains, the Institute prepared a detailed autopsy report. If you're not clear on what happened, you're welcome to come and see it. When Adrien hung up the phone, his mind was still foggy and dazed. At the same time, his memory raced back to yesterday. His beta secretary, normally so calm and collected, had shown a pale, terrified expression for the first time during the meeting. Despite the tense atmosphere, she had tried to tell him about that person, about his condition. She tried to speak twice, and he had cut her off coldly both times. He had guessed it had something to do with that person, but he had selfishly assumed he was just unwilling to go through with the surgery and was trying to get help from him or his secretary. How could it be that person was already dead? Nick was really dead? And all that was left were ashes. He wouldn't even get to see his body one last time. Adrien still felt like he was in a dream, a sense of unreality washing over him. He could still smell Nick's scent in the room. He must still be. This self-deception lasted until he arrived at the Institute and held the autopsy report in his hands. Mr. Nick died of gas poisoning. The autopsy shows the time of death was 3 days ago. Tests also revealed that Mr. Nick had been suffering from severe depression for several years. The conflict between his alpha gland and the prosthetic omega gland, in simple terms, his physical and mental health were both extremely poor. We have concluded it was a suicide. The staff member summarized the report and sighed softly. The data and other information in the report are more detailed. You can take a look, Mr. Vance. Adrien stood there, stunned, whispering to himself.
Suicide?
He suddenly remembered something he should have forgotten. His last phone call with Nick. He had just been dealing with work when Nick's call came in. He had been annoyed just seeing the number, but remembering he was his partner, he answered when Nick stubbornly called a second time. That person was probably just going to timidly ask when he was coming home again. But Nick's tone had sounded different that time. It was light, airy, as if he were on the verge of release. Nick had almost cheerfully asked him if he would come. Then, with a rare hint of complaint, as if they were long-lost lovers, he had whispered that he hadn't seen him in a long time, and he had just wanted to end the call as quickly as possible to get back to his work. Before he impatiently hung up, the last thing Nick said to him was, "I don't regret it. 3 days ago? 3 days ago." So back then, when Nick called, he was already preparing to die, was he? In the new era, for environmental reasons, cremated ashes were compressed into a capsule-sized pellet. When the staff member placed it in his palm, the almost non-existent weight made him feel dizzy and unreal all over again. That person had silently waited for him and loved him for 10 years, forgotten by everyone. Severe depression, the conflict of two pheromones, and he had lived like that for years. In a daze, Adrien saw it again. Every time he went back, Nick's smile was transparently faint, his body growing thinner by the day. So he was sick, but he had never cared. In his dying moments, he had asked if he would come. Was he waiting for someone to save him? To save him from the toxic gas that was suffocating him, or to save him from the life that was causing him so much pain? But he had just hung up the phone. No one could save him. The institute arrived 2 days later, but in those 2 days he had no friends, no one to find him. The house was so far from the city. The strong smell of disinfectant he'd noticed was probably just the AI repeatedly cleaning the house. The cold machine didn't know someone had died quietly within its walls. Just as this cold world had never acknowledged that person's silent existence for 10 years. The last words Nick left for him were, "I don't regret it." Adrien belatedly clutched the report, then carefully smoothed it out, afraid of tearing something so precious. The staff member didn't know what Adrien was thinking, only that the usually aloof man was suddenly lost in thought. He had his own work to do, so seeing that Adrien would indeed take Nick's ashes, he felt relieved and went back to his duties, leaving Adrien alone in the Institute's lounge. That person was dead. Whether it was the Nick who had been entangled with him for years, or the Jason who had momentarily captured his heart, he was gone. The staff at the Vance Corporation had noticed something recently. Adrien was spacing out more often, especially after Jason disappeared. Sometimes he would even stare off in the direction where Jason used to sit during meetings. The speculation that the boss had a crush on Jason seemed to be confirmed. Plus, word was that Adrien had broken up with his long-term partner. The reason was unknown, but everyone guessed it was for Jason. Paired with the boss's recent behavior, the rumor started to sound more and more like fact, as if at any moment the boss would travel to the ends of the earth to find Jason and propose. However, their hushed whispers were one day overheard by Adrien as he happened to pass by. The junior employees all ducked their heads in terror, bracing for a lecture. But after a long silence, all they heard was the boss saying quietly, "Don't spread baseless rumors in the future." After that, the boss seemed to pull himself together a bit, and they didn't dare say anything more. As for the boss's rumored partner, the one who had clung to him for years before fading away, they still didn't even know his name or what he looked like. Adrien went home every day. He felt like a piece of his heart was missing, a gaping hole that let a cold wind whistle through. Nothing he did could fill it. Only by lying in the bed where Nick used to sleep, breathing in the faint, lingering scent of his pheromones, could he slowly fall asleep. He touched the autopsy report over and over again, imprinting every number and piece of information onto his brain. The data was cold, but it felt like he was reliving every moment with that person. The symptoms of severe depression, the conflict and rejection of extreme pheromones. Physiologically, there would be frequent auditory and visual hallucinations, leading to impaired cardiopulmonary function and a weakened respiratory system, until even the air around him became an accomplice to murder. Psychologically, self-loathing, social dysfunction, anorexia, and a weariness of the world. If only someone had reached out to pull him back. Lying on that person's sheets, Adrien stared blankly at the ceiling. In the faint, almost vanished scent, tears inexplicably fell from his eyes. But no one ever tried to save him. The last time he had officially seen him was 2 months ago. That person was just as before, listless, slow-moving. Even the act of blinking seemed to be in slow motion. He hated the change in him. The institute had just gotten results, so he had directly scheduled the surgery for him and then coldly informed him of the progress. Seeing him with his eyes downcast, seemingly devoid of joy or sorrow, displeased him. He even tried to provoke a reaction with his words, especially when he thought of Jason, whom he admired at company meetings. He told him he still preferred pure omegas. That person suddenly reacted, looking up at him blankly. His face was so gaunt he couldn't even bear to look at it. But he couldn't help but want to see more of a reaction from him, as if he could glimpse the old Nick, the one whose every emotion was written on his face. So he said, Even your scent is the cheapest wine there is. That person flinched and actually started to cry. He cried silently, tears streaming down his sharp, thin face. He backed away as if frightened, trying to cover his face. It seemed to be the first time he had ever seen him cry. He suddenly felt a pang of panic, thinking his words had been too harsh. But if he wasn't harsh, how would that person agree to the surgery? Unwilling to be swayed by such emotions, he forced down the hand that wanted to comfort him and practically fled the house. And that was the last time he ever saw him. The changes in that person were never just about the gland. It was the depression and the cold indifference from him and from the world. And Omega, after being marked, needs the long-term companionship of their alpha, or their pheromones become unstable, and they can easily develop psychological problems. Of course, he knew that. It was written in textbooks. But he often forgot that person was his Omega too. And the timidness he despised so much was also a symptom of his illness. It was all over. He would never again meet someone like that, who loved him with everything they had, until they lost their life. Even Jason was him. The scent faded with each passing day, eventually seeming to dissipate just like its owner. Adrien felt a wave of panic. He called the institute to ask if there was any way to preserve a person's scent. While waiting, he called his friend, hoping his friend's extensive resources could help. His friend was surprised, thinking he had finally fallen for someone, and couldn't resist gossiping. They say you and that person split. I was wondering why. Did you finally find someone you like? Adrien closed his eyes. Even his friend's casual question brought him pain. And that person had lived like that for 10 years, his name not even remembered by anyone. I want to preserve someone's scent, he's gone. He didn't want to explain too much. Can you help me? Of course, I can ask around for you. Who is? Adrien let out a breath. Nick, also known as Jason, my partner. Huh? Who? If he could do it all over again. He wasn't sure if he loved that person back then. But in all of the Imperial Academy, he was the one who was most unforgettable. A person's life is short, and to truly meet someone so unforgettable, someone who makes your heart race, is even rarer. If he could do it all over again, maybe he would have accepted that person's love letter, stopping the isolation and cold shoulder before it began. Maybe he wouldn't have said that he only liked Omegas, and that person wouldn't have gotten the prosthetic gland. On the night of the graduation dance, maybe he still would have followed his instincts and marked him, but he would have listened to his explanation afterward. There would have been no little celebrity singer. After they got together, he would have been willing to marry him and work from home with him side by side. Even with virtual avatars on, an occasional real-life glance would make his subordinate sigh about how good their relationship was. When that person learned to cook his favorite old-world recipes, he would have stayed to help in the kitchen, reminding him to be careful with the gas stove. He would have agreed to take photos with him. Though he didn't like it himself, a few here and there would have been fine. He would let that person hang the photos in their room. He would spend time with him often, comforting him until his pheromones stabilized. If any problems arose, he would take him to the doctor immediately. As for the surgery to remove the gland and the bond, he would have seriously asked for his opinion. If Nick didn't want to do it, then they wouldn't. He would introduce him to his family and friends. They would live peacefully together until they grew old and retired. If he could do it all over again. Adrien closed his eyes. In the end, he had missed his chance to save him. That person was desperately calling for help, and he had just watched from the shore. His heart felt like it was being torn apart, but he knew this pain was not even a fraction of what that person had endured. In the end, that person was gone. His life was just over. Like a moth to a flame, he burned out completely, dying in silence, unremembered. Neat. The idea for holographic meetings was inspired by Kingsman. Author's note: Adrien's fate is to live in pain and in memory of that person, only able to sleep with the faint traces of his scent. Whether he finds a way to preserve that scent is up to your imagination, it's not important. I don't know if you noticed, but Adrien was actually fond of the original Nick from the start, but he's a person who doesn't understand emotions. Nick's own account mentions that Adrien used to come home often when they first got together and even praised his scent. Epilogue: 3 years after Nick's death. Not even the most advanced technology could preserve the fading scent of his pheromones. Adrien suffered from insomnia, anxiety, and even fits of rage, day after day. The thought that Nick's existence was about to be completely erased filled him with terror. He called the institute, urging them to find a way to preserve Nick's scent. He could barely smell any trace of him anymore. The researchers at the institute were at their wits' end. If the person were alive, they could have extracted pheromones from a blood serum to generate the scent. But now that he was dead, trying to extract residual pheromones from his pillows and sheets and preserve the scent for 3 years was already a monumental task. A permanent solution was simply impossible. The researchers explained this to Adrien, but seeing his obsession, they offered a suggestion. Regarding the preservation of Mr. Nick's scent, we have done all we can. The only thing we can do now is to simulate his scent. What do you think, Mr. Vance? The chronic lack of sleep had changed Adrien. He suffered from constant headaches, his personality became anxious and volatile, and he was a tinderbox. One moment he could be speaking calmly, the next he could be throwing things. People around him kept their distance. His life outside of work became increasingly lonely. If only Nick were still by his side. Often, it's only after someone is gone that you realize how important they were. The home-cooked meals he had grown accustomed to, the warm scent of home when he returned, the faint red wine undertone carried by the cheap prosthetic gland, all of it had gradually permeated his life over time. He had been unmoved back then, but after Nick was gone, he found that all these things he had overlooked came back to strike him with a vengeance. Now, not only could he not sleep, but on the rare occasions he did, he never saw Nick in his dreams. He had never even kept a single photo of Nick. Thinking of how Nick had carefully cut out their picture together, he was overcome with grief. Now, he had to trace the photo with his fingers every night before he could even lie down. Nick, he had ignored Nick for 10 whole years. That person had died by suicide, and right before, he had hung up on him in disgust. Nick had been tormented by 2 conflicting pheromones and suffered from severe depression. He was the executioner. He had killed the only person in the world who had loved him unconditionally and silently. Lying in Nick's old bed, Adrien stared wide-eyed at the ceiling. Whenever he thought about the despair in which that person had died, he couldn't stop the silent tears. It had been 3 years, and he could no longer smell Nick's scent at all. When the researchers asked him, his eyes lit up, and he deceived himself into thinking that Nick was coming back. How would the simulation work? He asked, licking his lips. Would it be accurate? The researcher replied, "We'll need you to describe it to us. If necessary, we'll also need you to participate in the development. We will do our very best." Nick's scent was a unique red wine. Adrien had never smelled such a distinctive and alluringly rich scent on anyone else. Later, Nick's pheromones became tinged with the cheap sweetness characteristic of the prosthetic omega gland, like a fine red wine maliciously spoiled with a splash of cheap sweet soda. He once missed Nick's original scent so much that he began to despise the later version of him. But he never thought that today he would miss that later scent just as much. Because no matter how the scent changed, it was still Nick. He took a rare break from his work to focus on the research. His enslaved subordinates secretly rejoiced. Their workload had finally lightened, and they no longer had to live in fear of making a mistake and being summoned upstairs for a reprimand by Mr. Vance. Some unlucky ones had even been fired on the spot. They didn't dare mention his name anymore. Left, Mr. Vance had become a completely different person. From a cold work machine to a demonic boss. 3 years. Mr. Vance was still single. A while back, he had made a grand announcement to everyone about his deceased partner, Nick. All the employees thought Adrien had gone mad. In his personal life, at least. Professionally, the Vance conglomerate was only getting bigger. Even though the work was hard, they couldn't bring themselves to quit. Sigh. Adrien threw himself into the research with 12/10 of his energy. He calculated that the new scent simulation should be 70% Nick's original red wine scent and 30% from the prosthetic gland. Even if they succeeded, it would only be the scent of pheromones. But he felt that if he could just complete it, He could deceive himself into pretending that Nick was still by his side. He waited anxiously for a year. Finally, the researchers came to his house with a sample of their creation. He opened the container, almost delirious with joy, and leaned in to smell. Yes, 70% red wine, 30% prosthetic gland. But it wasn't Nick's scent. Where had he gone wrong? The scent dissipated too quickly, filling the room with a strange, mixed aroma. For the first time, Adrien felt a true, tangible despair, as if he were in the deepest abyss. Before, the residual traces of Nick's scent, though a source of grief and regret, had offered him a tiny sliver of comfort. But now, everything was gone. Adrien went back to being the cold work machine he once was. The only difference was that he went to the Imperial Marriage Registry and had Nick's name officially added as his partner. The move made headlines across the empire, but the man himself was unfazed. He buried himself in work, using the busyness to numb the ever-growing despair and pain. Time eventually became a meaningless, pale vessel. 20 years passed in a flash. Overworked and frail, he fell ill and never recovered. In his final moments, he still lay in Nick's old bed, pretending he could still breathe in the scent that had long since vanished into the air. This big, empty house held memories. Even without Nick's scent, the soft bed, the warm-colored decor, the little trinkets and furniture Nick had carefully sourced from antique markets, all of it could strike Adrien's heart at any given moment, leaving him defenseless. That was all that was left of Nick. In a hazy state, he thought he saw Nick. It was the first time he had dreamt of him in all these years. It was the later Nick, pale-faced, rarely smiling, just gazing at him quietly. His eyes were as focused and full of affection as ever, but with a hint of caution. 100 emotions churned within him: elation, heartache, fear of loss. He hastily reached out to this vision of Nick. Nick, his hair was completely white now, his face lined with age. He vaguely wondered if Nick would even recognize him. He was no longer the dashing alpha of his youth, but Nick never took his hand. The vision vanished in the next instant, and he fell into another abyss. This time, the man in the bed never woke up again. When Adrien opened his eyes again, everything had changed. He was standing still in a vast sea of people. Cars rushed by, voices buzzed around him, but his corner was eerily quiet. He was so out of place, it was as if the world around him was a fast-forwarded color film, and he was a single black and white photograph left behind from a bygone era. Where was he? He noticed that his heart and lungs, which had been failing him, were now perfectly fine. Where was he? He raised his hand and tried to tap a passerby on the shoulder. His fingers passed right through the person's body. Stunned, Adrien tried again and again, confirming that he couldn't touch any of the pedestrians. But he was standing firmly on the ground. Was he the real entity, or was this world? Then he remembered something. Wait, wasn't he supposed to be dead? If he was a wandering spirit now, where would he be? And that person, was that person here? Was he still alive? Would he have a chance to see him? His heart, long dormant and frozen, was suddenly enveloped by a hope from an unknown source. He became uncontrollably excited, frantically searching for any familiar landmarks. Empire 5th Avenue. If he remembered correctly, the Imperial Academy, the place where he and Nick first met, was nearby. Did you hear that C-Class Alpha is chasing him again? The one whose family bought his way in. He's really going after him? Doesn't he know he only likes Omegas? What is he thinking? Adrien's eyes flew open. He had only caught a few keywords, but they were enough to make his heart race. He rushed in that direction and saw a few Alpha students in Imperial Academy uniforms walking out of the school. He suppressed a surge of intense excitement, feeling as if his heart might leap out of his chest. He followed them silently. As he got closer, the students' mocking discussion became clearer. I saw him give him a love letter today. He didn't even look at it. Ha, what did you expect? No one talks to him anymore. He's still shamelessly chasing after him. Even a beta who used to be friends with him said a few days ago that he was cutting ties. He's really something else. I'm actually curious to see how long he keeps this up. School is so boring. The conversation was all too familiar. In his past life, almost everyone had openly discussed that person's scandalous behavior, even to his face. Back then, he hadn't cared, letting them exaggerate and add fuel to the fire until that person was completely and utterly isolated. Adrien swayed slightly. Confronting that history again made him feel unsteady on his feet. Then, as if remembering something, he forced himself to focus. If he had gone back to the past, then Nick was still here, right? Adrien slowly walked to the Imperial Academy. Since the guards couldn't see him, or perhaps this world was just another one of his hallucinations, he entered the campus without any trouble. He walked exceptionally slowly. Even though he knew the young students passing by couldn't see him, he worried that the sound of his footsteps might accidentally startle that person. At the same time, he noticed that the students were in groups of 3 or 5, and their conversations were almost all about him. He gave him another one today. He should take a look at how he even got in here. Even if he's an alpha, he's just a C-class. If I were him, I wouldn't be interested either. He never even studied properly before, chasing after a bunch of omegas. He's not bad looking, but too bad the omegas don't care about his rank or background, haha. The students at the Imperial Academy were mostly from the Empire's noble families, and their post-presentation ranks were generally B-class or higher. To these high and mighty aristocrats, a C-class alpha like him was nothing more than a joke. Adrien closed his eyes, waves of nausea and pain washing over him. He forced himself to keep walking, to not stop. I just saw him in the library. He was studying, and that guy had the nerve to sit right next to him. And then, what do you think? Adrien just got up and moved. Haha. The library. Nick was in the library. And he was there too. Adrien let out a heavy breath and clenched his fists. He was suddenly unsure if, in his current ghostly state, it was necessary to witness that dark and painful history all over again. Perhaps unable to suppress the heavy longing in his heart, he found himself standing in the library before he knew it. He hadn't even entered the reading room when a strong gust of wind blew past him. A tall alpha in a uniform walked right through his body. The person was moving so fast that he didn't even get a clear look at his face, only catching a glimpse of the name tag on his uniform. Adrien. He froze. The next second, he heard another voice. Or rather, he could finally, truly hear that person's voice again. Huff, wait for me. Adrien stood rooted to the spot, watching as that person jogged through him, clutching a book and caught up to him. It was the original Nick. His hair was soft, but a few strands stubbornly stuck up. His white uniform shirt was worn carelessly, revealing a sliver of fair collarbone. Though he was an alpha, his eyes were filled with an unreserved adoration and love for the other alpha, him. His face felt wet. Adrien realized that he had, at some point, started to cry. Adrien, I'm guessing you're probably looking annoyed right now. Why won't this guy just disappear? That's probably the emotion I've read on your face most often over the years, even if you never say it. I like to think I'm the person who understands you best in this world. Even though my presence has always been minimal, just let me have this little moment of pride. We've been together for a long time, after all. Don't close this document yet. I promise, this is the last time I'll bother you. Honestly, I'm not sure if you'll ever even see this letter. But if by some chance you do, then I guess I'm probably already gone. I've placed this letter with important company files for the Vance Corporation, so by now, you also know that I am Jason. I can't think of any other reason you'd stumble upon this letter besides sorting through my belongings. You never set foot in my room, and you never showed any interest in my life. Sorry, I'm not trying to blame you. I swear I'm just stating a fact that everyone already knows. The person who should really be sorry is me. I trapped you with a gland and with the law for 10 years. I often feel guilty, especially when I see you smile less and less, and come home less and less. To say something really annoying, even though I feel guilty and blame myself, I've never truly regretted it. Not even with how terribly it all ended. Since I don't have regrets, I wanted to help you and be with you as much as I could, whether you cared about such a trivial thing or not. I couldn't help much in your personal life. So, in your professional life, Jason appeared. His existence was also to satisfy my own selfish desires. I really just wanted to see you more, even if it was just your avatar in the weekly meetings. About him, when I'm alone, I often wonder about something. If I didn't exist and you were single and free, what kind of person would you end up with? I mean, the marrying kind. Not the self-deceiving together we have now, which is probably more like a cage for you. I'm talking about the kind of together where you're naturally in love, where two people can stand in a church and sincerely promise to spend their lives together. Hold on, this is hard. Just thinking about it is one thing, but actually typing it out makes me so jealous I can barely breathe. Sigh. I really would be better off not existing. Okay, I need to continue. That person would definitely be an omega. Before we got to where we are today, you once praised the scent of my pheromones. You've probably forgotten. It was a really long time ago. So, even when you later said my scent was cheap and unpleasant, I never forgot that compliment. Not even now. So let's assume that omega's pheromones are also a faint red wine scent. Not too strong, but it would definitely be your favorite kind. As for looks, I'm not really sure what you like. But I remember the omegas you used to date were mostly the clean-cut, delicate type with round eyes. Let's just assume that's your type. You would definitely like a career-oriented, strong omega, not the homemaker type. Because you care so much about your work. I know you don't like me, and we were never really married or protected by Federation marriage laws, but you never once cheated on me. You really pour all your energy into your work. I often worried if your body could handle it, but before Jason existed, before I could join the Vance Corporation as someone else, I didn't know anything. If only there was someone who could share your burden. Before Jason appeared, I was jealous of the person I imagined you would one day love. After Jason appeared, I was jealous of Jason. I got too invested, especially when you'd give me a rare look of approval during a meeting. I'd be ecstatic, floating on cloud 9. If only I were really him. But I guess that's for the next life. Just kidding. I know you probably don't want to see me again. You've suffered enough in this life. In the next, you'd probably keep your distance from the very beginning. So, not meeting again would be for the best. I really ramble too much. I've gone on for so long. If you've actually read this far, I'm truly flattered, haha. If there really is a next life, I don't think I'll bother you again. I'll let myself go, and I'll let you go too. My only small wish is for someone to love me. No, just for someone to be willing to save me. I've lived in darkness for too long. Bright, shiny things intimidate me now. If someone could just pull me out of this mire, I think I'd be content. But not in this lifetime. I'm just too tired. Just being alive is painful. Sorry for dumping my negativity on you. To be honest, for the past few years, I've been thinking about setting you free. I know you've been seriously looking for a reliable doctor who can remove glands and marks, and I know that would be the best outcome for us, everything going back to the start. You'd still be that golden boy alpha, and I'd go back to being that ordinary alpha from before. But I can't go back. The person I am now, I can't even imagine what I would do without you. Every single day I find comfort in the fact that, for now at least, I'm the only partner in your life. I rely on that small comfort to fall asleep, day after day, year after year. The mere thought of you finding true love in the future, because so many people like you, is so painful my vision goes black and I can't sleep. So I can't do it. Sigh. So please forgive me for the choice I made in the end. This is the best ending for us. I let myself go, and you regain your freedom. I won't be able to see anything that happens in your future. I've arranged everything that might happen next. The AI in the house will remove all traces of my body, including any unpleasant smells. I've handed over all of Jason's work. I've even cleared my things out of the living room and the bedroom you usually stay in. I hope that in the end you won't hate me so much. I can't bring myself to say fake words like I wish you happiness, so I'll just sincerely wish you success in your career. I hope you won't be so tired in the future. Even though you're a high-ranking alpha, your body will eventually start to feel the strain. That's all. I'm sorry, Nick. December 20th, 405 FY. Written on a whim. The premise is that Nick thought Adrien would never open, or at least never finish, this letter. So it's more of a self-analysis to express his feelings. His mental state was very unstable at that point, after all. Chapter 13 sent. Adrien walked his Omega boyfriend back to his dorm. Just as he was about to head upstairs, his boyfriend seemed to remember something and stopped. He turned to look at Adrien, his cheeks slightly flushed, hesitating. He wanted a kiss from his amazing boyfriend, or at least a few sweet words. But Adrien's expression was neutral. After dropping him off, he simply said goodbye and walked away, leaving the Omega standing there, disappointed. Hey! Adrien turned to face a pair of clear, bright eyes. He took a step back, but his tone was unsurprised. You again. Nick smiled shyly. Yeah, it's lunchtime. I was wondering if you wanted to eat together? I already ate, Adrien said flatly. Seeing the person in front of him visibly deflate, he added, with my boyfriend. Oh right. You have a boyfriend, Nick said in a small voice. Well then, I'll go get something to eat. He walked away, looking back every few steps. Adrien silently turned his head, avoiding his gaze. But he took an almost imperceptible sniff. That person's scent didn't give him that uncomfortable feeling he usually got from another alpha. Instead, smelled good.